Instant greetings, y'all. Proud Filipina Sharm Zaspina here, who's counting the days till we turn the page and start fresh with a new calendar. But before we do, and there's still over a month and a half left till the new year, let's do a little throwback or reminiscing on last year, 2022, and the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, the battle versus the COVID-19 pandemic by way of ramped-up vaccination, and the Uvalde, Texas shooting massacre that left 19 kids and 2 school teachers dead, as covered in this VOA feature, Farewell 2022.
Farewell 2022. Let's take one last look at the stories that shaped this year. War in Ukraine, business in Africa, the enduring and evolving COVID pandemic. A look back at the year that was and what's coming in 2023. On The Inside Story, Farewell 2022.
Hello, I'm Carla Babb, reporting from the Pentagon, where we've been following one of the year's most important stories, Russia's war on Ukraine. The United States has so far committed more than $19 billion in military aid since February 24th. That's on average about $2 billion per month for weapons, ammunition, training, and other Ukrainian defense needs. Let's take a look at what weapons have been most effective on the battlefield, what additional weapons experts say are still needed, and what's yet to come. The battle for Ukraine is now a lethal artillery duel, with both sides burning through tens of thousands of rounds each week.
It's been the artillery systems that have really won the day on many occasions for the Ukrainian defenders.
Analysts and former officials say the most effective systems the U.S. has provided to Ukraine are the UK-built M777 howitzers and high-mobility artillery rocket systems, more commonly known as HIMARS.
There are hundreds of Ukrainian baby boys that are named HIMARS now because it's had such an impact there. And it is that long-range precision that is making such a difference.
Defense officials tell VOA the U.S. has delivered 20 HIMARS to date. The U.S. has provided Gimler's rockets for these HIMARS systems, which have a range of about 90 kilometers.
That's good, but that's not enough. The ATACMS rocket, also fired by HIMARS, would give a range of 300 kilometers. If the Ukrainians had that now, they could already be hitting Sevastopol and other critical sites inside Crimea.
As Russia improved its counter-drone capabilities on the battlefield, Ukraine used American-made Switchblade drones, Phoenix Ghost drones, and Turkish-made Bayraktar drones, or UAVs, for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance.
Ukrainians have basically taken their UAV to ground force pairing to an art form. They're a lot more flexible. A lot of their units actually feature tactical and long-range UAVs for artillery strikes, for providing situational awareness to the Ukrainian forces. And in many cases, they're simply better aware of where Russians are and can react much faster.
But Russia has an influx of drones as well from its ally, Iran. According to the Pentagon, Russia has deployed hundreds of Iranian-made attack drones to target critical infrastructure in Ukraine. To knock them out of the sky, Ukrainian forces use air defense systems like American-made Stingers, heat-seeking missiles with a range of about 5 kilometers, small enough to carry on foot. Analysts say Ukrainian forces have managed to shoot down between 60 to 85% of Russia's Iranian-made drones. Last month, the Pentagon delivered 2 NASAMS to Ukraine, National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile Systems, which can target drones, aircraft, and cruise missiles.
From what I hear, it's in the 30s for 30, kind of 35 attempted intercepts, 35 intercepts. It's doing very well. It's defending major cities.
But Ukraine still struggles to defend itself from Russia's Iskander ballistic missiles, striking deep inside Ukrainian territory. The Pentagon's solution, officials tell VOA, will be to send Patriot missiles to Ukraine to counter these weapons. But retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery warns the U.S. would likely need at least 6 months to a year to train Ukrainians to use the complex and costly system.
Each round of Patriot is between 3 and 4 million apiece. That is a very expensive system. It would use up a lot of the money being set aside for them.
Overall, analysts agree that U.S. and NATO weapons provided to Kyiv have critically helped Ukraine defend its homeland, with the former commander of U.S. Army Europe making this bold prediction to VOA.
If we keep doing what we're doing right now, then I think Ukraine is on track to liberate Crimea by the end of August.
The Crimean Peninsula, illegally annexed by Russia since 2014, serves as a hub for Russian fighters in Ukraine. Freeing it would be a huge blow to Moscow. Sweden and Finland saw Russia's invasion of Ukraine as unacceptable and formally asked to join NATO for collective protection. Our senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain brings us up to date on where their NATO membership stands.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken has welcomed his Swedish and Finnish counterparts to the State Department, where the top issue was both countries' applications to join NATO. The two countries have a long history of military non-alignment, but that changed after Russia invaded Ukraine last February. Blinken said Sweden and Finland share NATO's values and are already integrating into the alliance while they are waiting on approval from all 30 NATO countries. The holdup on their accession has been Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who accuses Sweden of being a haven for terrorists. Blinken said efforts to resolve the stumbling blocks are ongoing.
What both countries have done in engaging with Turkey and with NATO itself has been to address those concerns in tangible ways.
Blinken said he is confident that NATO will soon be able to welcome Finland and Sweden as members. But Finnish Foreign Minister Pekka Haavisto expressed concern that Turkey has yet to set a date for their parliament to ratify the accession.
Of course, what we are still missing is the clear date and clear plan of the Turkish parliament to deal with this issue. And we know that Turkey is going to the elections. Of course, our hope is that this decision should come from Turkey rather sooner than later.
Turkey is expected to hold elections next May or June. Last month, Sweden's parliament passed a constitutional amendment that will make it possible to pass tougher anti-terror laws, a key demand from Turkey to approve Stockholm's NATO membership bid. Experts say the new legislation will make it easier to prosecute members of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, blacklisted by Ankara and most of its Western allies. High-level diplomacy is ongoing, as both Finland and Sweden have warned that time is of the essence, because Russian President Vladimir Putin's aggression is unpredictable. Russia's foreign ministry has warned that it would view Finland or Sweden joining NATO as a threat to its security and would respond. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
While Sweden and Finland will extend NATO's border with Russia to the Arctic, there's no place more critical to aiding Ukraine than Poland. It's the pass-through for those billions of dollars of military weapons that we discussed earlier, along with humanitarian supplies. And it's been the destination for millions of Ukrainians fleeing the fighting. From Warsaw, VOA Eastern European Bureau Chief Miroslava Gongadze explains Poland's vital role.
One day before Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, Polish President Andrzej Duda visited Kyiv and promised that Poland would never leave Ukraine alone. After the war began, Poland welcomed Ukrainians fleeing the war and treated them as guests. Łukasz Adamski, deputy director of Moroszewski Center in Warsaw, pointed out that Poland became a home for millions of Ukrainian refugees. Ukrainian citizens have extended rights in Poland and vice versa. Poland also has played a crucial role in facilitating the delivery of Western weapons, systems and humanitarian supplies to Ukraine. Adamski said that the Russian threats changed the not always smooth relationship between Ukraine and Poland.
War contributed significantly to the intensification of bilateral contact, to the enormous improvement of trust, and liking to each other. And it also revealed that both states have common interest, common vision of future.
In May, Polish President Duda spoke to the Ukrainian parliament in person, the first foreign leader to do so since the war began. He stressed his support for Ukraine's request to join the European Union and criticized those in Europe who suggested that Ukraine accept some of Russian President Vladimir Putin's demands. In his view, any territorial concession to Russia would be the blow to the entire Western world.
Only Ukraine has a right to decide its future. Only Ukraine has a right to decide for itself. The world must demand from Russia the total withdrawal from Ukraine's territory and stop breaking international law.
In 2022, Poland became one of Ukraine's main military supporters and, along with fellow Baltic states, a lobbyist for Kyiv's integration into EU and NATO. Warsaw's strong support for Ukraine contributed to an improvement in what had been a period of fairly bumpy relations with Washington.
U.S. President Joseph Biden visited Poland in March, meeting Ukrainian refugees and American troops on the ground. During his trip, he asserted the United States' strategic goal of supporting Ukraine's fight for democracy and self-determination and identified Poland as an important battlefield in the struggle for freedom and security in Europe. With Polish territory being a base for Ukrainian support, Poland has become an indispensable U.S. ally for European security. Miroslava Gongadze, VOA News, Warsaw, Poland.
Pivoting now to the U.S.-Africa Summit in Washington, leaders from nearly 50 African nations were invited by President Biden to boost cooperation and blunt the growing influence of China and Russia. Accompanying the summit, a commitment of $55 billion by the U.S., investing in Africa's economy, security, and health. VOA White House correspondent Anita Powell takes us inside the summit.
President Joe Biden says he's serious about Africa's success and has a serious plan to get the continent on better footing.
And the United States is committed to supporting every aspect of Africa's inclusive growth and creating the best possible environment for sustained commercial engagement between Africa companies and American companies. The United States is all in on Africa's future.
U.S. officials announced that they would give African nations $55 billion over the next 3 years, much of it directed toward health and climate projects. On Tuesday, Biden also announced an agreement between the U.S. and the new African Continental Free Trade Area, and a range of other bilateral agreements that he said would unlock economic growth in the world's fastest-growing continent. And he said the U.S. is taking this relationship online by working with Congress to invest about $350 million in what he called the digital transformation with Africa.
And this will include partnerships between African-American companies to provide cybersecurity services to make sure Africa's digital environment is reliable and secure.
The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations told VOA that U.S. assistance won't be affected by African nations' reluctance to condemn Russia and cut ties over its invasion of Ukraine.
We're not paying countries to vote for condemning Russia, and we're not threatening countries who decide not to vote, but we are appealing to them. We're appealing to their values. We're appealing to right versus wrong.
And the new Prime Minister of Lesotho, also the richest man in the tiny southern African nation, told VOA's Peter Claudy that African leaders also want to see a 10-year extension of the African Growth and Opportunities Act, which confers duty-free status on some African exports.
We have just negotiated this morning with the senators that we need to extend AGOA by 10 years because it's coming to an end in 2025. So we have already started negotiations in that part. AGOA is very, very, very important to us as a country.
The last summit that brought dozens of African leaders to Washington was 8 years ago. But administration officials say their commitment to the mother continent is as strong today as it ever was. Anita Powell, VOA News, Washington.
Africa's Sahel region has been a battleground for influence for more than a decade. 2022 saw a 50% increase in the number of deaths as terrorism and political instability sowed fear in 3 countries while displacing millions of people. From Niger's capital of Niamey, our Henry Wilkins sorts out the fighting factions in the Sahel.
As the Western Sahel conflict entered its 11th year in 2022, violence grew worse. Data from the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project shows around 9,000 fatalities due to conflict in 2022, up from about 6,000 the year before. Analysts say many in Sahel countries are exhausted by the worsening conflict, which this video on social media purports to show, and they are looking to new international partners for solutions. Some in the region, like Bachiru Ouedraogo in Burkina Faso, believe Russia will remedy the country's insecurity.
We have been with France for years. If they really wanted to help us with terrorism, we think they would have done it long ago. If you partner with someone who doesn't help you take care of business, you have to get rid of them and find someone who can. That's why we think we have to pivot to Russia.
Faut le débarrasser et puis tu cherches quelqu'un qui va t'aider à arranger ton problème.
2022 saw France wrap up Operation Barkhane, its military intervention based in Mali, as it became increasingly unpopular and relations with Mali's military junta began to deteriorate. France is now moving much of its military operation in the Sahel to Niger. In Mali, French troops have been replaced by mercenaries from a Russian paramilitary organisation, the Wagner Group, which has been accused of human rights abuses and of fueling more violence than they prevent. In Burkina Faso, pro-Russian and anti-French protests and attacks on French-owned institutions and businesses have become commonplace since a second military coup in a year took place in September. Both the Malian and Burkinabe juntas cited the previous government's inability to solve the insecurity. Asked how the Sahel's conflict could develop in 2023, one analyst told VOA,
"What remains to be seen is what happens as the population of Mali sort of figures out that things are getting worse despite everything. Burkina Faso, I worry a great deal about. I think given the scale of the problems of Burkina Faso, I think they need a lot more international help. I'd like to see the US government getting more involved, trying to help the Burkinabe government."
Analysts have also noted that an increasing number of terror attacks are taking place in the northern regions of Ivory Coast, Ghana, Togo and Benin, along the borders with Burkina Faso and Niger. Press freedom has dwindled according to advocacy groups, with international broadcasters and journalists being banned from Burkina Faso and Mali. In Burkina Faso, the new junta says it is recruiting 30,000 extra civilian volunteers to fight terrorism. But rights groups say the volunteers are carrying out many rights abuses, playing into the hands of terrorist group recruiters. In all, more than 2.5 million have been displaced by the Sahel conflict. Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Niamey, Niger.
Everything that happened in 2022, as well as 2021 and 2020 for that matter, happened in the shadow of the COVID pandemic. More than 13 billion shots have been developed and delivered to combat COVID-19. But more than 6.5 million people have died in the pandemic, and getting vaccines to poorer countries remains a priority. VOA's Steve Baragona takes us inside the challenges that lie ahead.
February 24th, 2021, a delivery of COVID-19 vaccines arrives in Ghana, striking a blow for vaccine equity.
We're really happy because they're going to benefit a large number of beneficiaries in Ghana. Ghana is the first country to receive the COVAX vaccines.
The UN-backed COVAX program aimed to help low and middle-income countries get access to COVID vaccines after rich countries had locked down most of the early supplies. The program struggled to compete for limited doses. After nearly 2 billion shots delivered, COVAX is narrowing its scope to serve the poorest countries. That's in part because 2 years later, there are plenty of shots available. Not everyone is getting them, however, says Duke University Global Health Professor Krishna Udaikumar.
The inequities really are stark and continued. In Africa, only 25% of the population of the entire continent is fully vaccinated, compared with more than 75% in places like South America.
Supply is not the biggest problem anymore. Demand is. People in lower income countries are not lining up for COVID shots, says Center for Global Development health expert Janine Madan-Keller.
This lack of demand is really a concerning trend we're seeing. The reasons behind low demand, I'd say, are quite complex and multifaceted.
Misinformation about the vaccines is rampant. Trust in governments providing the shots is low, and many people in lower-income countries don't see COVID as much of a threat. Plus, the vaccines took too long to arrive, Udai Kumar says.
While there was demand, it was unmet. So it's reasonable now that we're seeing more hesitancy because we missed the time when everybody was ready to accept and take vaccines.
Much of the delay was because vaccine manufacturing is concentrated in a few, mostly wealthier nations. Poorer nations were left hoping for handouts, says Brown University Pandemic Center Director Jennifer Nuzzo.
I think we have to figure out how to make these vaccines in a much more distributed way than we did before, so we aren't just relying on donations. It's clear donations do not work because when faced with a crisis, countries will always choose to prioritize their own populations.
Efforts are underway to build more vaccine factories in Africa, but building them is just the start. How to keep them in business in the long run is another question, Keller says.
Who is going to buy these vaccines, or what vaccines make sense, both from an economic but also from a health perspective, for these manufacturers to produce? Where will the money to pay for them come from?
The African Union faces these questions as it aims to manufacture 60% of its routine vaccines on the continent by 2040. The challenge is to build a sustainable vaccine industry that can handle both regular vaccines and the inevitable next pandemic. Steve Baragona, VOA News.
Congress in 2022 passed new federal gun safety legislation for the first time in more than 2 decades. The bipartisan measure came in the wake of a mass shooting at an elementary school in Texas and another at a supermarket in New York. But mass shootings continue to plague the United States, with more than 600 such incidents recorded this year. That's on average nearly 2 mass shootings a day. VOA's Chris Simpkins has more.
Gun violence surged in many U.S. communities in 2022, including a near record number of mass casualty shooting incidents. In May, an 18-year-old gunman wielding a semi-automatic rifle killed 19 children and 2 adults at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. It was the deadliest U.S. school shooting in nearly a decade. A week later, President Joe Biden addressed the nation.
For God's sake, how much more carnage are we willing to accept? How many more innocent American lives must be taken before we say enough, enough?
Days earlier, a 19-year-old opened fire with a semi-automatic rifle at a supermarket in Buffalo, New York, killing 10 people. The suspect said he was targeting black people. On July 4th in Highland Park, Illinois, a gunman fired 83 rounds in less than a minute from atop a building, killing 7 people and wounding dozens of others who had gathered for an Independence Day parade. In November, a shooter killed 5 people and wounded 17 others at a gay nightclub in Colorado. The 22-year-old suspect has been charged with murder, bias-motivated crimes, and assault. Criminologist Professor Jack McDivitt sees a troubling pattern.
We're starting to see guns being used in hate crimes more. That wasn't the case for a long time. We're starting to see more often that people use firearms to go after victims who they perceive to be different.
Mass shootings are broadly defined as an incident in which 4 or more people are shot or killed, not including the shooter. They occurred in practically every U.S. state, totaling more than 600 nationwide in 2022. Some see a connection between a rise in hateful rhetoric and bias-driven violence. While mass shootings grab national headlines, they account for a small percentage of more than 40,000 U.S. gun deaths recorded in 2022. Half were by suicide.
Well, the motion is adopted.
In June, Congress approved the first national gun legislation in decades. The law seeks to deny firearms to those deemed to be a threat to public safety and enhances background checks for gun purchases. While gun control advocates want to go further and ban semi-automatic weapons, the U.S. Supreme Court in June overturned a New York state law that restricted carrying concealed handguns in public. Gun rights defenders rejoiced.
What I have noticed is places that have simpler, legal gun laws are safer. Because, for instance, the recent shootings that we had, I feel If a place is unprotected by firearms, it's a soft target.
Amid the debate, the United States remains plagued by the highest rate of gun deaths among advanced industrialized nations. Chris Simpkins, VOA News, Washington.
This wraps up our 2022 season of The Inside Story. We are preparing exciting episodes ahead in 2023, including one where I take you inside the arms race between the U.S. and China. I'm Carla Babb reporting at the Pentagon. See you next week for The Inside Story.
And that's a wrap for today. Hoping you came out a tad enlightened as much as we did. We look forward to you joining us again for the next feature. And here's reminding you to work hard, dream big, count your blessings, and be kind, and catch the news right here. This is Sharm Espina for Stories from the Grid.